On This Week in Enterprise Tech, Curtis, Bam, and I talk with a great guest, Ramesh Menon from Infoworks, about agile data engineering. Plus, credit card companies are trying to secure our online transactions with a rotating CVV number on the back of your card. We'll see if it works. Join us for this and more. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 324, recorded January 11th, 2019. Agile Data Engineering with Infoworks. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software powers the full spectrum of collaboration between IT teams and the rest of your organization. Visit Atlassian.com to find out which Atlassian tools are right for your team and give their products a try for free. And by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Find the right people for your business this year at linkedin.com/thisweek and get $50 off your first job post. Terms and conditions apply. And by Slack. Slack is a collaboration hub for your work that makes sure the right people in your team are always in the loop and key information is always at their fingertips. Learn more at slack.com. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Louis Maresca, your guide to this big world of the enterprise. But I definitely can't guide you by myself. I am joined by the dudes, the enterprise dudes, starting with the return of Mr. Brian McHenry, Director of Global Security Solutions at F5 Networks. Bam! Happy New Year, my friend. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Lou. It's good to be back. It's been a bit of a bumpy couple of months with lots of travel, lots of holidays, and also a fair, maybe an unfair share of illness that's prevented me from participating and hanging out with the crew on Friday afternoons.
Well, it's always great to have you back. We actually have a recent title change there. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. They a little bit the same responsibilities, but moved up from senior manager to director. Apparently, they're liking what I'm doing over here at F5, so I'm just going to keep on doing more of the same stuff.
Fantastic. Well, it wouldn't be a week of enterprise tech without getting the insights of our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. Curtis, have you been following all the CES stuff going on?
You know, I have been following CES news and been doing so happy that I can follow it from right here in the swamp rather than out in the desert. Some interesting stuff, but given everything, especially the tales of woe that Brian has been sharing with us, I think safely stored here in the swamp is the way to be.
I definitely get that. I heard there's lots of robots roaming around there this year. It should be interesting to see what they're for. We'll have to actually do an episode about what's going on there from the enterprise perspective. Well, folks, we definitely have a jam-packed show. We're not only going to chat about the credit card industry and how they're trying to resecure their transactions, but we also have a great guest to talk about agile data engineering, some of my favorite words and things to talk about. Well, before we talk about all that goodness, let's go ahead and jump into this week's blips. Now, in this past year, we've heard about different attacks on DNS, and in fact, it's actually on a rise over the past year. Most of the attacks are focused on DDoS attacks, dubbed DNS amplification. Now, most of the time, these are driven by botnets. Well, there is actually a new enemy on the street, and federal authorities and private researchers are alerting companies of a new wave of attacks coming. Some of these attacks are targeted at corrupting DNS records. Now, how are they doing that? Well, let's take an example of a domain. Let's call it cocobunga.com. And attackers are replacing the legitimate IP address for a domain with a booby-trapped address that attackers can cause cocobunga.com to carry out a variety of malicious activities, including harvesting users' login credentials. Now, this specific technique was detected by a security firm called FireEye and found that they are particularly effective because they're allowed attackers to obtain valid TLS certificates that prevent browsers from detecting the hijacking. Now, detection of these attacks range from telecoms and ISPs, government, and other sensitive commercial entities. Especially hackers are changing what is known as the DNS-A record. Now, it works when the attackers have somehow previously compromised the login credentials for the administration panel of the target DNS provider. The attacker then changes the IP address of the target domain to the one they actually control. And with the control over the domain, the attacker then can automate Let's Encrypt service to generate a valid TLS certificate for it. Now, Cisco's Talos team previously described this method, and then people who visit the targeted domain don't access its legitimate server. Now, how should an organization actually protect themselves? Well, FireEye has some items for you. First, ensure that they're using multi-factor authentication to protect domain's administration panel. Check their A and NS records are valid. Search for transparency logs for unauthorized TLS certificates covering their domains, and conduct internal investigations to assess if networks have been compromised. Now, in 2019, it might be time for organizations to start auditing legacy systems like these, because these are the weakest link in their infrastructure. And that's the exact point hackers are going to exploit.
Speaking of exploiting, there's a new side channel attack, and, well, this one is hardware agnostic. A new side channel attack that bypasses specific chips for a hardware agnostic operating system based approach has been published by a team of researchers. The attack, with a serious security punch but lacking a sexy name, takes advantage of a fundamental feature of modern operating systems to gain access to data that programmers and users assume will be hidden. The power of this new vulnerability is that it can examine and then exfiltrate data across an entire page of the cache, and data that is there for a number of milliseconds. Now, since the attacking data check itself takes only microseconds, that's enough time to do things like read a number of keystrokes or the clear text response to a query involving cryptographic keys. This vulnerability has its basis in OS system calls, so it's much easier to exploit than something like Meltdown or Spectre, and much easier to weaponize in a malicious payload, as well as being potentially difficult to patch because of the consequences to existing software. Now, you add in developers who lazily use things like system time calls as the pseudo-random seeds in their crypto routines, and you have a vulnerability that has some real power. Look for even more like this as computer science grad students around the world take advantage of a new topic for winning thesis or dissertation projects.
Thieves are using informed delivery to spy on mail and commit fraud. Signing up to be notified of upcoming deliveries from various services like UPS and FedEx has become a really popular convenience feature. Not to be left out, the United States Postal Service launched their own version of this called Informed Delivery, which emails you grayscale scans of letter-sized mail parcels. Scammers have figured out that the verification of signing up for this service requires little more than name and address, enabling them to get a sneak peeks of mailings to target addresses. The trick is they have to sign up before you, the actual homeowner or the resident at that address, signs up themselves. If that mail appears to be something sensitive or valuable like a new credit card, the scammers can intercept the mail before you have a chance to receive it. Stealing credit cards from mailboxes is nothing new, but being able to get advanced notification via email greatly improves the efficiency of this type of scam. It also enables scammers to more easily sign up for credit cards fraudulently in your name and then intercept those cards as well. The USPS is aware of this type of scam and recommends a couple of countermeasures. The first one, obviously, is to make sure you sign up for your address for this service first before the scammer ever gets the chance. The other method is to opt out entirely via an email to esafe@usps.gov.
Well, when deploying consumer IoT devices, organizations have been kind of sloppy with the security on them. Now, if Mo was here, she'd tell you, well, that her prediction might actually come true this year because the trend of IoT devices and their data continues. Now, data issues don't actually only surface from small, inexperienced startups. It comes from large, experienced organizations as well. Now, this recent report is coming from a well-known brand, Ring, and how it handles customers' data. Now, from an insider, the report talks about how the organization, now owned by Amazon, has a Ukrainian-based research and development team, which has virtually unsecured access to a folder on Amazon's S3 cloud storage service that contains every video created by every Ring camera around the world. Now, this includes your sensitive videos that can be browsed and viewed by these employees. Not only that, the videos are also stored they're unencrypted. Now, this means these videos could be siphoned out and leaked without too much effort. Now, especially this could be leaked out, especially by a disgruntled employee. Now, in addition to the public videos on a share, Ring unnecessarily provided executives and engineers in the U.S. with highly privileged access to the company's technical support video portal, allowing unfiltered, round-the-clock live feeds from some customers' camos, regardless of whether they needed access to extreme sensitive data or not. Now, in fact, the person providing the information remembers employees joking around about situations like who someone was bringing home after a date. Now, in addition to this report, there's also a set of internal documents showing how the company is actually struggling with its video ML and AI platforms as well. Now, one hopes that this is a signal to companies that they need to be more responsible with customers' data. If Amazon were to be held accountable for the way they treat customers' data, it might actually send an even bigger message.
Well, Google's G Suite will now alert admins if someone tries to make off with data. Only admins are affected by the latest G Suite changes, which also include a new alert deletion option and a link to audit logs for G Suite Business and Basic domains. Google explained all this in a blog post saying, quote, "The data export initiated," end quote, alert comes in when a domain data export begins and is designed to help notify admins of potentially malicious activity. Admins can also delete alert as they are resolved or no longer needed. Users will need to be super admin or alert center delegated admin to use G Suite's Alert Center, which serves as a single place for admins to view security-related notifications, alerts, and actions across the entirety of G Suite.
U.S. telcos are caught selling your data location again, and senators are demanding new laws. U.S. Senator Ron Wyden is leading the charge on calling for new legislation to ban carriers from selling mobile subscribers' location data after a motherboard report revealed that T-Mobile, AT&T, and Sprint continue to sell location data to third-party aggregators that are allowing the data to then be resold on the black market to anyone willing to pay. Motherboard reported on the use of third-party services who gain access to location data under the auspices of lawful access for the purpose of bail bonds and other things. Motherboard journalist Joseph Cox then paid a bounty hunter $300 to pinpoint the exact location of a specific phone. The abuse occurs because providers sell this location data to third-party aggregators without verifying how the location data is used. I, for one, I'm not sure that calling for more legislation will directly solve this problem if the use of this data isn't more rigorously monitored and violators heavily penalized. The question is if there's a meaningful way to combat and enforce the abuse enforce against the abuse of this data.
Now, in this day and age, software patents have become difficult. Why? Well, because organizations find it difficult to spend money on patents they can't actually enforce. How come? Well, because you can't really determine if something's stealing your algorithm or your code unless the code is open source and can be viewed. Plus, a landmark 2014 ruling by the Supreme Court questioned the validity of most and many large software patents. In the wake of that ruling, countless broad software patents became invalid, dealing a blow to the litigation-happy patent trolls nationwide. Now, this week, the Patent Office published a new draft of a section on examining software and other potentially abstract ideas in its Manual of Patent Examination Procedure, MPEP. Now, this official document helps patent examiners understand and interpret relevant legal principles around this. Now, the latest versions drawing on the recent federal court rulings, including for far tighter restrictions on what they may be excluded from patentability. Now, patent trolls have estimated to cost the industry in the upwards of $29 billion each year. Now, this new procedure contains a process that's been coined the Mayo-Alice test, named after the famous software patent cases in the past. Now, it starts with the Mayo test to determine whether the claims are directed to an abstract idea, a law of nature, or a natural phenomenon. If the claims are directed to the judicial exception, the second part of the Mayo test is to determine whether the claim recites additional elements that amount to significantly more than just judicial exceptions. Now, the Supreme Court has described the second part as the test as the search for inventive concept. Now, in addition to this, European patent law has a concept called the technical effect doctrine. Now, the technical effect doctrine says that if an invention improves the function of a computer, then it's likely to be more patentable. Now, I don't know if between you and I, this sounds kind of complex. Now, these new processes, rules, and policies seem to be muddying the water even more to be considered to help you actually understand whether it's a valuable patent or not. Now, what this could mean is that we might see an upswing of more software patents and possibly more lawsuits related to those because the identification of valuable inventions is not clear and concise going forward. We'll have to wait and see if 2019 brings us the year of the patent trolls. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get there, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Atlassian. Now, whether you are an engineer team or you develop software or other products, you probably have used Atlassian products, one or two of them here and there. And I remember back in 2002 when Atlassian launched a product that was really, really perfect timing to meet the needs of emerging generation, which are developers committed to agile principles. Now, originally it was conceived as a bug tracking tool. Now, the Jira ticket quickly became the digital record of choice for tracking units of work in highly collaborative agile development teams. Now, fast forward 16 years, DevOps is on everyone's docket, and Atlassian is still leading the pack in areas that helps teams rise to that occasion. Now, Atlassian really is a collaboration software company that empowers teams around the world. Now, like all organizations, you want to ship products faster, more efficiently, with higher quality, and ensure your customers' feedback loops add to the business value. Sometimes businesses fall short with different workflows that haven't been implemented. Well, just like they've been doing for over 16 years, this is where Atlassian's wheelhouse is. They give you and your organization the power to manage complex collaborations. Plus, their tools and services are not just for developers. Atlassian offers an affordable, reliable suite of tools for teams of all sizes, from DevOps to Agile, IT apps to Ops, to ITSM and whatever's next. Atlassian provides the technology backbone to help modern IT organizations plan, service, and support the kind of change that propels those businesses forward. Now, with Jira Software, Confluence, and Bitbucket, Atlassian forms the backbone of effective cross-team project planning and organization and communication. In fact, I've actually used Bitbucket quite a bit for my repository of choice for many projects across the board. Now, with Jira Ops, Ops Genie, and Status Page, they help teams better detect incidents, alert response teams, and coordinate response efforts to resolve issues faster and keep customers or stakeholders up to date. Now, your teams can choose tools that are right for your current framework while trusting as you grow, they will grow with you. Now, it all integrates seamlessly with Jira and Confluence, which keeps your team from bouncing around from different platforms to different platforms. Like all Atlassian products, the tools for your IT team are easy and free to try. Just head to Atlassian.com to find out which Atlassian offering is right for your team. Try Atlassian today and unleash your IT's team potential. That's Atlassian.com. And we thank Atlassian for their support in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, some of you might have been in the industry long enough to remember those small little dongles you used to have given to you by an organization that actually had a rotating code on it, and you used it to connect to your VPN or network. Ancient tech. Well, with the phone authenticators and other services and devices, this is actually becoming easier for organizations to deploy. Well, what about consumers? Well, they have the concept for your, for your credit cards called chip and PIN, which that came into market and allows you to capture a PIN and the data from your chip to basically have a unique transaction for every transaction. Now, that actually has turned out to be not as secure as we hope. In fact, people have been able to capture one's PINs, whether you're using cameras or not, and be able to kind of steal that card and still use it. Now, what card providers have been trying to do is trying to actually make online transactions a little bit more secure using a much different approach. Well, slightly different approach. Now, what if card providers had a way to provide a rotating CVV, which is actually that little number on the back of your card called the card verification value? And would that add to the security? We'll have to see. Now, this feature seems to be focused more on online transactions rather than those brick and mortar retail store transactions that consumers use their physical chip and PIN. Now, the first pilot of this new program was PNC Bank, and they wanted to run the program for about 90 days to see how it affected consumers. Now, the tech is fairly simple. It provides a small e-ink display on the back of the chip with a rotating 3-digit CVV number. So this is fairly interesting because this means that not only you have the chip and PIN for you to use it in the brick and mortar, but when you go home, you have a very similar kind of approach that some of these authenticators have, where now you have this rotating number that you have to have the physical card in hand in order to guess or to get, so that you can actually do the transactions online. So guys, I want to bring you back in. I want to bring you in here. Now, Curtis, is this really better than chip and PIN?
Well, I think it's a good addition to chip and PIN. If you look at it, chip and PIN is primarily a mechanism for what's called the card present transaction. That's where you hand over a physical card at a point of sale terminal. The CV number is one that tends to be used for a card not present transaction over the phone or online. And so what the CVV number is trying to, its upgrade is trying to increase the safety of the card not present transaction. That's important because merchants pay a different transaction fee for card not present transaction because the security is seen as less. The losses are greater statistically for card not present. So if they could come up with this mechanism that makes it better, that makes it so that a criminal could not just copy it down once and sell it in a bundle with the card number and name, customer name, then all it takes is knocking off a few fractional percentage points of fraud losses to mount up to be big dollars in the industry. So I look at this as a really positive step and a step in the direction of something else that's coming that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
So this is interesting. The chat room's actually bringing this up, which is around the fact that, hey, there's all these other pay systems today, whether it's Apple Pay, Google Pay, which are also trying to affect this process. Where we basically talked about, Curtis, you talked about, hey, not having your card and those types of transactions. So they're trying to help fix that problem as well. Where this way, you either have your phone or your device and you kind of authenticate yourself, whether it's biometrics or whatnot. So they're attempting to fix this problem as well. Brian, I want to throw it over to you. Is this better than something like, let's say, a software authenticator? Because I know that a lot of people who are obviously using their cards or their phones, or their mobile PCs online to buy things, they actually have their PC with them. Why not just use an authenticator here?
Well, the problem is that you got to tie that authenticator to your credit card. And while it's very easy for us to tie our credit card or our authentications to, say, our email, our Google Mail, Hotmail, and our work accounts to a software authenticator. To tie the use of your credit card to a software authenticator requires the cooperation and the full participation of the credit card company. So that's not something that's really going to scale terribly well, or I'm not smart enough to think of a way to make that scale. Perhaps there's a business there for someone, but this gives you a little bit of both, and it's a really good sign that they're recognizing that card not present fraud is really hard to stop. That CVV number is not only can be stolen just like the rest of the credit card number, if it's not been tokenized such in a way that the Apple Pay and the Android solutions offer, but it can also be guessed at. Was what we found is that when you're looking at credit card fraud, card not present fraud in particular, is that given a valid credit card number, so all you got to do is steal the credit card number, not even the expiration date or the CVV. There are bots out there that the fraudsters will use that can actually guess those numbers with a fair degree of accuracy.
Right. Curtis, I want to throw this over to you to get your opinion on this, because I know even the chat room, CRM's bringing up the fact that, hey, Authenticator would be good, or maybe even YubiKey using it here. Why do they have to have it on the back of the card? What's its purpose? Is there any purpose to going beyond what these mobile devices and mobile PCs already support today?
Well, I think what we have is the first step in a transition that the credit card companies are trying to anticipate, and that is the step away from the requirement for physical credit cards. In the same way that we've seen in many cases for personal use, checkbooks have all but disappeared from our financial lives. The credit card companies and the banks foresee a day when most of our point of sale transactions happen using tokenized methods on our smartphones. They know that that's coming. They see, even though the use of things like Apple Pay and Google Pay are small, relatively speaking, they see that it's coming and they like it because it is tokenized, because it doesn't require shipping sensitive information like the credit card number and PIN and things like that around on the internet, and therefore makes it much less likely that a criminal can intercept a transaction and get stuff that is usable long term. So I think what we're going to see is something like this. The e-ink is a decent response, although in many cases I think we get to worry about battery life because if you have to replace the card every year, the cost goes up even more. What you have to do again is start balancing all of these things, like the cost of fraud and the percentage of fraud, which has been fairly consistent over the past few years, versus the cost of replacing these cards and the advanced technology on the cards. I think we are going to see these tokens and the rotating CVVs on the back of cards start to come in as a bridge technology before we get to the fully tokenized transactions based on the payment systems like Apple Pay and Google Pay.
Right. I think you bring up a good point. I think it could be a gap technology, and kind of going along with that, now they say, hey, it actually costs quite a bit more to actually construct these cards, because they have to put these little e-ink displays and they have to put the circuitry in there to generate the code. But also, it's probably going to cost more for organizations to adopt. Now, Brian, you've seen implementation for organizations across the board. Implementing a new service as even just a gap thing. Is that something that's a value prop for organizations to do? Is it enough of a value prop for them to do this to get an increased cost in their process to support this kind of rotating number, even if it's just a gap technology?
That's a great question, and I think it's evident that there's got to be some value to it because of the cost that we already see in this initial report is $15 a card versus like $2 a card. So the actual physical card is more expensive to even send. So that gives us a sign of if the credit card companies are willing to send out credit cards at that cost level. That already tells us that they see there's a return on investment for them here versus how much it's costing them in fraud and how much card not present fraud is actually costing them at this point.
Well, all right. We've been talking about the credit card fraud, but there are other kinds of fraud out there. And we want to look now at one piece of technology that's trying to eliminate a different sort of fraud. Google's Chrome is trying to stop back button hijacking. Now, we've all been there. The website where you go to a particular page and then try to use the back arrow to get out of it, and you find that clicking the back arrow just drops you back on the page you're trying to leave. In a lot of cases, if you go up and click and hold on that back button, you find this whole list of that same page that's been there. There are a number of mechanisms that cause this, but a new commit on the Chromium source, and this was first spotted by a site called 9to5 Google, outlines a plan to stop these weird website schemes like this with a lockdown on what's called history manipulation. The commit reads, quote, Entries that are added to the back forward list without the user's intention are marked to be skipped on subsequent back button invocations, end quote. Now, the back button moves backwards through your web history, and along with the close button, it's one of the most common ways to leave a website. Now, this is very bad news if you're a website designer working for a shady website company, and sites have been messing with this for a long time by adding extra entries to the web history, like the ones I described at the top of this byte. It's not hard to do this with a redirect. You can imagine loading example1.com from a search result, which instantly redirects you to example2.com, and so on and so forth. Both pages get stored in your history, so pressing back from example 2 would send you to example 1, which repeats the process, and you see how this happens. To stop this kind of history manipulation, bad history entries will soon get a skippable flag, which means the back button will ignore them when it navigates through the order history. One commit says Google still needs to come up with some sort of pruning logic to declare a website is skippable, but that could probably be done with something like a timestamp. Face it, if you spent 0 seconds on a redirect page, it's probably not a good, valid entry. Now, there could be, I suppose, some legitimate reasons for this kind of behavior. Lou, what do you think? Is this one where we can just look at categorically ignoring this kind of behavior, or do we risk getting rid of some valuable behavior at the same time?
So there's these new apps today that are coming out. PWAs are single page applications that are built for not only mobile but for web, so they can have one code source across all their applications. And the key here is they actually take advantage of this technology, because what it allows them to do, it allows them to kind of produce a single page and let them kind of like increment the page or change the UI. And then the user, even if they use the back button, it kind of takes them back to a previous view of the app rather than kind of navigating them away from the source or from the actual page. What it also allows them to do is they can actually prefetch pages that they might think that the user might want to go back to or actually navigate to, so they can kind of jump ahead in the history and kind of make sure that the browser prefetches them and loads them, even though they're doing kind of redirects that are not visible to the user. So there's a lot of like valid reasons and technology around using this technology, which is why it exists. But again, there's always these technology that gets taken advantage of, and then they kind of take it away, and then we lose all the advantage of it. So I'm hoping that the new way that they're doing this in Chromium will actually support it in a way where it still allows vendors and developers to still use the feature in a more valuable way. Because again, most of their the Google OS that they have, it has most of their apps are PWAs. So I think, for them to be able to support a lot of those features, they need this feature in there. So I definitely think there's a ton of valid cases. I'm hoping that the way they fix it won't break all of those.
Well, Brian, I want to go to you, because it seems that for many of us, this falls into the pain in the posterior category. But is there a point where the pain shifts from being an annoyance to being a real security issue? And are we going to see the vendors of browsers continue to try and build more security into their products?
Well, absolutely, Curt. I think that's the trend. As someone who's spent a lot of time in the application security space or web application security space over the last decade or so, there's been a lot of focus on things like input validation, for example, right? I want to make sure what the user sends to me in a request is valid, that there's no malicious code embedded, for example. With what Lou was talking about just a moment ago, single page applications, which are essentially now the browser gets a little bit richer in terms of content, is really just fetching a bit of data. There's a lot of JavaScript, a lot of logic that's living on the browser side or the client side of the experience. It means there's a lot less need for extensive input validation, because a lot of logic is living in the browser itself. So the net effect of that is that even if I wanted to provide a better experience for my users and make sure that this kind of stuff didn't happen to them, I may not be able to because everything's going on at the client side. So I have a lot of challenges with web security because everything is so API driven, whether it's a mobile app talking to the API or it's a so-called single page web application. So what the browsers are now doing is what you see here. What the Chromium project is doing is implementing better security features so that users can protect themselves, and so that there's default behaviors that really give us a better sense of security. So I'm not, I'm less likely to click on bad links. I'm less likely to get click jacked where there's maybe an overlay on the page. So this is something where browser vendors, whether it's Google in the Chromium project or Safari or Microsoft with Edge, I think security features are going to be something that is a big part of the arms race in terms of trying to get dominance in the browser market.
It seems to me that this brings up a couple of important issues, and one of them is the ongoing battle between browser-based applications and genuine native apps on mobile devices. Because let's face it, for a growing population, when you talk about browser, you're talking about something that's viewed on a mobile device rather than something that's viewed on a desktop. The other is that redirects are still important. Lou, you are involved in the development of applications. How big a challenge can you imagine it being to somehow be able to differentiate between a legitimate redirect and one that's been put in place for the pure purpose of keeping someone illegitimately trapped on a page?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting case because I think in the case of, for instance, authentication flows, now there's a ton of redirects that happen in those, whether it's an implicit flow or not. They're going to automatically redirect you based off of the existence of cookies or access tokens in your cache. And so that's a legitimate cause to kind of prevent the back button because they don't want you, again, hitting the service again and having to run that logic. They don't want to have to look up things again. They know that you're already authenticated. Why go and have to do that all again? Plus, it can kind of break that kind of back and forth between the identity provider, and your website. So I think that there are, again, lots of legitimate things. Now, to be able to detect that and then say, okay, well, this is a legitimate case, again, this is going to be a difficult thing. Now, the whole concept of having the kind of skippable flag to allow navigators to kind of skip that and not put that in their history, that might be an option because that might make it so that, okay, well, hey, we're going to redirect you, but it doesn't need to be in your history at all. So we'll, from an authentication perspective, that might be a good valid solution. So again, there's a lot of valid solutions here that come along with it. And I want to call it something you said as well, is a lot of organizations are looking to build applications where they only have to have kind of a single technology understanding in their organization, so they don't have to go and hire iOS and Android developers and Windows developers and so on and so forth. They want to be able to build an app once, and so that's where something like React Native comes into play, and React Native Web and React.js, so they can build it all using JavaScript and build a website and a web app or PWA or single page application that kind of reacts and the same whether it's on a mobile device or not. And so these apps are going to come more and more fruition. So these features need to be able to support the richness of those environments. And so I really think that they need to find a really good solution here as well. Well, folks, unfortunately, we've run out of time for the bites. We want to get to our next part of the show that brings in a really great guest to drop some knowledge on the Quiet Riot. But before we do, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Now, we are all professionals, and where are all the professionals today? Well, they're over on LinkedIn, and it's the world's largest professional network. Now, some of the biggest names in the industry post content every day there. Now, I post out there, whether it's jobs, interest, technology, I post everything. Plus, I've made some amazing professional contacts using LinkedIn. That goes to show you that LinkedIn can really help your business and find the right talent. Now, post your job where people go every day to make connections, grow in their career, and discover job opportunities. It's LinkedIn. You've actually used probably other sites before, but they just don't feel right. They feel clunky. You don't get the right responses from individuals. It's not great. Well, if you think about it, there are 500 million pros on LinkedIn, and the advantage of LinkedIn it gives you the tools to target the next generation workforce with laser precision. Now, most of LinkedIn members aren't checking job boards regularly, but 9 out of 10 LinkedIn members are open to and interested in new opportunities like yours. Now, with most of the U.S. workforce on LinkedIn, posting on LinkedIn is the best way to get your job opportunity right in front of the right people. Now, people with the right skills and background for your role who are also ready for something new, you know where to find them. They're on LinkedIn. Now, it's the best way to find the person who will help you grow your business, and why a new hire is made every 8 seconds using LinkedIn. It's really the best place to go when it comes to growing your talent resources in your organization. Now, I've used it in the past. It's amazingly fast to scale your talent acquisition. It really is. It's the right place. Now, find the right people for your business this year at linkedin.com/thisweek and get $50 off your first job post. That's linkedin.com/thisweek to get $50 off your first job post. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn.com/thisweek. And we thank LinkedIn Talent Solutions for their support in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the Twilight Riot. And today we have Ramesh Menon, VP of Engineering at Infoworks. Ramesh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be on.
Now, our audience loves to hear origin stories and people's journeys through tech. Can you maybe take us through your journey and how you kind of made your way through the tech industry?
Sure. So I started about 25 years ago, have always been working in data. And my first job was actually developing algorithms that would match and link identity information in any country, language, or character set, and was used for a lot of, as you can imagine, interesting applications. Since then, I've been in various data-related roles. I was at Informatica, and over there, I spent a lot of time working on data quality and enterprise data governance, and that sort of led me on to master data management. So this is really the whole, the structure and philosophy and technology around getting an enterprise single view of assets like customers or products and so on. After that, I decided to specialize more in big data, and I joined a startup called Yark Data. Over there, we shipped what was then and maybe still is now the world's largest in-memory appliance for large-scale graph data discovery. We also shipped the first Spark optimized appliance in partnership with one of the Hadoop distribution vendors. And I've been at Infoworks for about almost 4 years now. And most of my career has been in product management.
Fantastic. Now, we have a bunch of topics to talk about, especially data pipelines and so on. But one thing I wanted to talk about maybe more in a general sense is a lot of organizations have challenges out there today, and they're trying to kind of evolve and what they call digital transformations. Can you maybe talk about a little bit what organizations kind of run into as challenges as they attempt to have that digital transformation?
Sure. So maybe we can roll back a little bit and also talk about why are companies and various enterprises trying to do digital transformation. If we look at what I would call sort of the web native or digital native companies, examples like Amazon and Google, who have essentially built their digital infrastructure from scratch, right? We hear about Amazon having kept track of every single click and operation on their website since inception. Now, on the other hand, we've got companies that have been around for a long time. Take any insurance company that's been around for 100 years. They've not kept every claim and every payment, right? So their systems, have evolved sort of at maybe at a different pace, given the history and given the industry they've operated in. However, today, all these enterprises, who did not have the benefit of starting as digital natives, are in the process of transforming their business to become more agile People talk about data being the new oil. I typically don't like cliches, but this one may actually be a good one. And so the process of getting value out of the data is really, I think, one of the fundamental drivers about how do we do business better, how do we market better, how do we serve customers better, how can we be more efficient in our operations. All of those things are driving this digital transformation, and it comes down to making better use of data.
All right, fantastic. So what are some of the challenges that some of the organizations are running into as they attempt to kind of evolve and do that? They obviously have a ton of data. They need to be able to bring it from their on-premise organization. They need to bring it up. They need to start developing analytics on it. So what type of challenges are in that kind of entire process? And in fact, what are IdeaWorks trying to actually solve here as well?
Yeah. So the challenge really is that as these enterprises are going through this digital transformation, there are lots of new tools and environments that have come up, whether it's big data, Hadoop, and cloud, which we hear about a lot. The challenge, of course, is that working with these technologies requires very skilled resources. So a lot of the same digital native companies like Google and like Facebook and Twitter and so on have developed a lot of the foundational open source technologies that really are driving this new sort of technology platform. However, if we look at the vast majority of enterprises, they don't have the skills or the resources really who are familiar with these new paradigms of doing distributed computing, of being able to code, how to make use of these platforms to get data into the platforms, prepare it, organize it, and serve it up for these analytics, which is really what the business part of these enterprises are really waiting for. So given these sort of the skills gap, the resource constraints, the inability to hire people who know these technologies is really what's been sort of the primary challenge. So that's why when we look at some of the statistics, very few companies, in fact, one survey said only about 15% of the enterprises have actually been able to get into production using these big data and modern data technologies. So what Infoworks does is really automate the complexity, automate away the complexity of all these data engineering tasks, which is, how do I get data out of these different systems into my big data or cloud platform? How do I get the data then transformed and prepared to support various kinds of analytics? So whether I'm trying to do machine learning or whether I'm trying to do just reporting or business intelligence, and how do I then operate all of this at scale in a production environment? So really what Infoworks does is provide an automated data engineering platform that does all of this in a code-free environment and is easy for enterprises to pick up and get value out of their data in a fraction of the time it would take without Infoworks.
Makes sense. So you kind of alluded to a little bit about the technology here, and we know that organizations today, they tend to have very heterogeneous type of data. They have data coming from sales systems and data coming from service systems and all of these different systems, infrastructure, and so on. So maybe you can kind of take us through, since you talk about kind of the automation of all this process, how the data kind of gets from these systems, from these kind of third-party systems, gets it aggregated together, and how do you actually start making use out of it?
Yeah, so and that's typically sort of a very standard use case, if you will, or process that nearly every enterprise has to do. If you want to get a really good view of your business, you have to typically combine data that comes from many sources. In the past, before sort of big data and cloud made it easier and more economical to handle a lot of data, the process was limited to highly curated data that went into a data warehouse. Today, with data lakes and clouds, it's much easier, cheaper to get data from all these different systems that live not only in the enterprise, but also with third-party providers. So, for example, if you're a large, consumer packaged goods company, it's now possible to look at not only point of sale transactions, which tell you, who bought what product, but also to now start bringing in data about weather and see how does weather impact the sales of different types of products or product categories. The complexity, though, is being able to extract data from these systems, and to be able to do that efficiently, whether it's a CRM system or whether it's a ERP system or a transactional system, or also dealing with different third-party external systems. One thing that is typically underestimated in all of this process is that it's not good enough to just bring the data in once, because the source data keeps changing, right? So customers change their addresses, they change their phone numbers, stores move addresses because they shift locations. So the challenge is not only in bringing the data in, but actually keeping it synchronized and refreshed at the rate at which the consuming applications expect out of that process.
Makes sense. You talked about this a little bit about the fact that there is a kind of a real-time streaming data ingestion part of the platform. That means that you're constantly streaming data into the system and it's developing more analytics, or you're just kind of caching that data somewhere in some big kind of data lake somewhere, and then eventually these analytics get generated based off that after they've been kind of merged together with the previous historical data. Like how does that work?
That's exactly right. So the philosophy that we use is really to first bring data from these different systems into the data lake or the cloud system, and it depends upon the frequency with which the data shows up. So in some cases, we do support streaming applications where, for example, one of our customers is an oil and gas company where they're getting data that's streaming off of the oil wells. This data is showing up literally every second, and is providing operational data about how the oil rig is operating today. So how the well is operating in terms of depth drilled and so on, or what's the temperature and so on, and that's coming in through a stream. Now at the same time, they have on-premise systems, so they have their legacy relational database and other reference data systems that are providing data that's changing maybe less frequently. So sometimes they could be changing every hour, or they could be changing every day, such as the names of the employees who are working on that rig probably don't change that often. So different latencies in terms of how the data is being refreshed is something that customers use with Infoworks. Once the data comes into the data lake, it's there in its original form, which means that now different applications can combine, standardize, cleanse, or change the data depending on what they want. So if I keep with the oil and gas example, one use case is to combine the operational data coming off of the well with the reference data. So where is this well located is really something that's done by combining the well data with the reference data about the latitude, longitude, or who's operating the well, and those kinds of things. And then combining all of that into a dashboard so that people who are monitoring performance will be able to see what's going on with the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico versus, say, maybe in oil fields in Canada. The same data could then be combined differently by data scientists who now want to create their own data models or their own data sets and aggregate them on a minute, hour, monthly basis so that they can then do predictive maintenance analytics. So, try to predict when is this well going to break down. So different types of analytics, different types of data streams, and different types of users are all essentially getting the benefit of the automation that Infoworks provides in this platform.
Fantastic. Well, this is definitely super interesting. We definitely want to bring you back and talk a little bit more about that data lake solution, as well as bring our co-host back in to ask some questions. But before we do, we want to thank another sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Slack. Now, if you haven't used Slack before, it literally is the collaboration hub for you, your work, whatever it might be. You can bring together almost everyone or anyone with Slack. Now, there are so many ways I've used Slack before. It allows me to bring together numerous groups in order to just organize the way we work. I've used it actually to talk between corporations too, whether it's a large cloud organization that I want to collaborate with or collaborate with customers directly. We use Slack. We actually use Slack. And I've seen IT and operations teams as well as engineering and development groups brought together in a set of channels that let everyone organize their conversations with real-time messaging. Now, there are a ton of features on top of just real-time messaging. There's video and voice calling as well as file sharing. It pretty much provides an unstoppable set of features to ensure your organization's productivity. Now, why use email? Save time, go back, go search through all the historical context and the discussions on Slack from different groups, teams, and topics. Slack brings a rich environment for keeping people up to date with what's new and what's going on, create new channels for new issues, show alerts for real-time updates for the channel. Because Slack can integrate with your other systems, it brings the information to you. Now, you can get data from Jira, Salesforce, Zendesk, Google Drive, and even hook up a webhook. It really is the collaboration hub. Now, it brings together and ensures that everyone is communicating efficiently and staying productive every step of the way. Now, imagine your sales team, they get together on Slack. They have a chat about the latest products, educate the different sales individuals around those products. They make sure they talk about chat and new prospects, new clients. Well, you can come back later. If you didn't get to be part of that meeting, you can be part of that discussion, you can come back later. You can review all the historical data, learn about those products, understand where to go, be really effective salesperson, and that's all because of Slack. Now, I've used Slack before. I can tell you there's some great features. In fact, I really like that Slack Threads feature. We can actually start a separate conversation to the side about some topic without actually diverging the actual main thread, which is nice. And the searching is really great too. You have some really advanced search modifiers in there. It helps you a lot. Now, people of any generation have found ways to use Slack to increase their productivity. I've used it. I've talked to developers around the industry, designers. I've talked in the UX space. It's really great. Not only that, but Slack has a really strong app ecosystem as well. You want more functionality, integrations? Well, there's Jira, Salesforce, Zendesk, and more. Over 1,000 apps that can integrate to. And it also has a really thriving developer community as well. So check it out. In fact, you can not only that, but you can use the app from anywhere. You can use it both on your iOS device, your Android device, your Windows devices, your Mac devices, and more. Slack reduces your emails, streamlines your communication, saves time, and increases your productivity. I can't say enough about Slack. It's a really great product. Now, with Slack, your team is better connected. Learn more at slack.com. That's slack.com. And we thank Slack for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, we've been talking with Ramesh Menon from Infoworks about the whole digital transformation. How some organizations are having problems with that process. And once they get through that process, how Infoworks is actually helping here. What I did want to do is I wanted to bring our co-host back in, starting with Brian, because I think you had some questions about the whole security side of things.
Yeah, so with new privacy laws, data sovereignty is critically important. So I'm a little interested about how Infoworks handles emerging requirements like GDPR and what accommodations, if any, they've had to make to deployment models or how data is processed in order to maintain compliance.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, our customers are struggling with, various such compliance, right? So whether it's GDPR, some of our customers deal with financial PII information, and actually our first customer, is dealing with HIPAA compliance. So. We approach security from sort of a number of different layers and approaches. So the first is, of course, that when we start off with even bringing data into the data lake or into the platform, we provide the ability for our users to actually select and filter the data that they actually want to bring in. So this is through filtering. It's also through data masking and so on, so that certain data, like for example, latitude and longitude, may not leave a particular country, but you can bring all the other data sets in. Once the data is actually brought over, of course we do standard things like encryption over the wire and so on. But once it's in the platform, one of the things we have done is to support technologies such as encryption at rest, and also to integrate with the underlying security constructs of the platform. So whether it's Hadoop or whether it's the cloud. And the reason we do this is so that the customer has got only one place where they need to worry about security at rest, which is at the platform level, and we abide by the rules that they set. And then lastly, we also provide a role-based access control and collaboration framework that allows different users to work on the data sets that they have been explicitly provisioned to. So those are the multiple layers that we do to support security and compliance.
Ramesh, I just wanted to ask a question. You know, I've followed the development of data lakes, and a question that a lot of people have is, really, aside from the frequency of the commits into the lake, you talk about streaming data coming in. Fundamentally, how are these different from the OLAP databases that we all grew up with? I mean, those tended to be databases that took input from a number of different enterprise sources, made them available for analytics. What makes a data lake intrinsically different from those?
Yeah, I think the main thing that started off with data lakes being different from, say, data warehouses was really about the economical scalability. So I give an anecdote. I think about 15 years ago, I was actually invited to a party at one of our customers. This is, with a previous company, where they were celebrating the fact that their data warehouse had just crossed 2 terabytes in capacity. And I think they had spent over $30 million in infrastructure and software to get that type of capacity. Now, of course, today my kid has got more than that on their gaming console, right? But that is really sort of one of the key things that's different about data lakes. When data lakes started, there was this ability to put all this enterprise data. So, for example, when we talk again about, say, an insurance company, they may have put 6 months worth of their prior claims into the data warehouse in a sort of OLAP type environment. Now, when we look at data lakes, it's possible to put 100 years worth of data if you have it. That's been sort of the big game changer, if you will. Pardon me, I'm still recovering from the flus that have been going around a lot over the past couple of weeks. So.
I understand, and we appreciate you being with us despite that. Well, we've talked, Ramesh, about the products that your company offers, and you do some very interesting things. But do you find that when you talk companies about data lakes, that there is the assumption that particular technology or particular products, especially some open source systems, are going to be involved in anything that's labeled a data lake?
So typically data lakes, I think by definition, mean that they are working on what we call sort of the Hadoop and Friends stack. So I use that term relatively loosely because it's, Hadoop itself is being redefined. But a lot of the technologies in data lakes are in fact based on open source. One of the interesting trends, of course, is with cloud. So as enterprises are increasingly, using cloud for various analytics purposes, the notion of a data lake in the cloud is becoming, more and more prevalent. And we are seeing less, of course, of open source in those environments as the separation of compute and storage happens. But essentially, I think that's the main trend. Today, I would say on-premise, a data lake is by definition based primarily on open source technology. In the cloud, it still is, but I think trending towards being more, cloud native, cloud specific, based on each cloud provider.
Fantastic. Now, we wanted to throw it back over to you, Bam, because you had some more questions about security and some other things.
Yeah, so there's probably no greater swamp of data, and I see Infoworks talks about turning data swamps into data lakes. There's no greater swamp of data than what many of our audience often complains about is the swamp of IT data. And me personally, the security logs that get generated that we're tasked with as IT professionals to make sense of and create action out of and insight. Can you tell us a little bit about how Infoworks might be able to provide some clarity and insight when it comes to IT data sources?
Sure. So especially one of the things about data lakes that's, as I talked earlier, was really about the scalability. So a lot of times IT could not store logs or network logs, net flow and those kinds of things just because it was not cost effective to store them inside data warehouses. Today, with the data lake, it's possible to put all of this information into a data lake and to store it efficiently at any level of granularity. And then the other part of it, of course, is that now there is a compute capability to be able to do analytics, whether it's running at batch analytics across the entire history of data that you have, but also then to take those kinds of models or patterns and be able to determine if there is anything that's happening either fraudulently or whether there's any kind of suspicious activity. Those kinds of things are much easier to do because of a data lake. Now, where Infoworks comes in is that we automate the process of bringing and collecting all of that data, putting it into a model or different types of models to be able to access and analyze for different purposes without needing to write any code. And I think that's sort of the last obstacle that's typically been in place of what I would call sort of IT data analytics, is that the ability to get resources to code these sorts of different types of analytics or data engineering processes to make it available for analytics is no longer needed with an automated data engineering platform like Infoworks.
Now, Ramesh, we're actually running a little bit low on time, but we did want to give you a chance to talk about if an organization wanted to get started with Infoworks' systems and they want to get signed up and start getting a little analytics and so on and so forth. Where do they go? How do they get started? What's the best place for them to get started at?
Yeah, so as always, the best place is to start with our website. So it's infoworks.io. We have a number of different resources on our website. So if you go to the product section, of course, it will give a description of a lot of the details, which I've barely touched upon in this time. And then there's also the resources page. So the resources page has assets such as a demo, right? So there's a 12-minute demo that gives one a quick walkthrough of the various capabilities of the product for a given use case. And then there are numerous other articles. I think, going back to one of the questions earlier, there's a webinar here about, data warehousing in the age of data lakes, which really talks about, how data warehouses have evolved with the access and availability of data lakes. So I would recommend that, folks go to our website, look at the case studies, watch the demos, various, other sort of, focused material based on different topics, and also visit our blogs. There's a lot of technical information on our blogs that will also be very helpful, that focus on specific areas like how does data ingestion work? How do you deal with changing data that's coming into the data lake, and so on.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Ramesh Menon, VP of Engineering at Infoworks. Thank you again for being on This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thank you.
Well, folks. Thank you. Well, folks, we've done it again. You've sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 ponds of data. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially my co-host in crime. I couldn't do the show without them. Starting with BAM, Brian McHenry. It's always a great guest to have you on. Can you tell the folks at home where they can find you and all of your work? Oh, you're muted. Bug.
Dang. So you can always find me on devcentral.f5.com and on Twitter at BA McHenry. Lately, though, I've been getting much more involved at threat research at F5. So you can head on over to f5labs.com and check out what we're doing in terms of security research.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bam, for being here. I think it's going to be a tremendous year of enterprise tech, and it's always great to have Mr. Curtis Franklin keeping us informed. Can you tell the folks at home where they can find you and all of your work?
Well, you can always find my work at Dark Reading. I will post about virtually all of that on my Twitter feed at KG4GWA. And I'm starting to line up appointments and other things. We're heading into the conference season. So if any of our listeners are going to be at RSA, I'll be there. Also at Interop. And boy, the conferences, they just keep on coming. So give me a shout. Let me know what you think. Drop me a direct message at KG4GWA. Always love to hear from the Twiat Riot.
Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, Bam. Thanks, guys, for being here. You definitely make the show a great one. We also want to thank you as well. You are the person who drops in each and every week to watch and listen to our show. You are our loyal listeners and our watchers, and we want to make it easy for you to watch and listen on the show and catch up on your enterprise news. Go ahead and go right now to the show page, twit.tv/Twyet. There you'll find all of the amazing back episodes, all the show notes, information about the co-hosts, guest information, links to all the stories we cover, as well as, more importantly, next to all that stuff is, and next to all the videos as well, as you get those helpful download or subscribe links. Now, you want to help and support the show, go ahead and get your audio version of your choice, video version, HD video version of your choice. Listen on any one of your devices, even using the podcast app of your choice. So it's the best way to stay on top of your enterprise and IT news. So go ahead and subscribe today. Now, after you subscribe, go ahead and join our chat room live. We actually do our show live each and every week, 1:30 Pacific p.m. at live.twit.tv. And in fact, we also do chat room live as well at irc.twit.tv. We have a great audience in there. They give us some questions in the show. They actually help us with topics and discussions. So feel free to jump in there and chat with us live. Now, if you wanted to see what I do, and don't forget to follow me at twitter.com/LouMM. Also, you want to see what I do at my normal job, you go to Microsoft dev.office.com, where we post all the latest and greatest stuff about customizing your Office experience. I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa, who continue to support us each and every week during This Week in Enterprise Tech. I also want to thank all the engineers at Twit, and of course our loyal producer and our co-host as well, Mr. Brian Chi, who actually does all the bookings and plannings and helps us with the shows each and every week. So thanks to Brian for doing all that work. Before we sign out, though, we have to thank our TD for today, Victor. Welcome to the Twyet family here. We used to have the Shark Man, but he's yesterday's news. Now Victor is our man. We want to continue our tradition, though, for each and every week. Kevin, he didn't do such a great job of answering these questions, so we want to make sure you're following and knowing what the topics. What was the main topic of today's show?
Well, speaking of like taking over for Shark Boy, I've been paying attention, and I think today's topic was something about lakes.
Very, very, very close. But unfortunately, that was not close enough. It was agile data engineering, but you were very, very close. Maybe next time.
All right.
Well, folks, until next time, I'm Louis Maresca saying, if you just want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep Twyet.